All right, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to whoever was tapping the glass. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. Once again, my name is Carrie Kirkman, Director of the Canadian Club of Toronto and your host. Viewers, thank you for joining us. Our club regularly provides a forum for business, political, and cultural leaders to share their ideas and perspectives with us. Our club offers a diversity of speakers who address current trends and topics. The club is aware of our country's rich diversity and strives to reflect this, not only in the topics, but in the speakers who present them, like today's panel. I would like to acknowledge the generous support of today's sponsor, the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Corporate Policy, which is ethicscentre.ca. Thank you. And now it's time to introduce our panel. It's no longer a taboo topic. Workplace harassment is an important human issue, not just a human resource issue. It's also a reputational risk. Stronger laws to address harassment in the workplace can no longer be ignored. Let's hear from our panelists now. Joining us are Colin Bohm. Colin has been with Chorus Entertainment, Inc. for 16 years. He currently serves as Executive Vice President, International Development and Corporate Strategy. He's held a number of senior roles at Chorus, including overseeing some of Canada's leading children's TV brands, YTV and Nickelodeon Canada. Lisa Kimmel. Lisa provides senior counsel to clients and is responsible for Canadian strategy development and execution in her role as President and CEO of Edelman Canada. She is a member of Edelman's Global Management Team and was recently named Chair of Edelman's Global Women's Executive Network. Janice Rubin. Janice Rubin is co-founder and co-managing partner of Rubin Tomlinson LLP. She is recognized as one of Canada's leading employment lawyers and considered a top authority on workplace harassment and workplace investigation. 3 years ago, Janice worked with CBC to conduct a high-profile workplace investigation. And moderating the panel is Kenneth Fredeen. Kenneth has been General Counsel, Secretary to the Board, and a member of the leadership team with Deloitte LLP since 2000. Working with other Canadian General Counsel, Kenneth was a founding member of Legal Leaders for Diversity and Inclusion, and he now serves as President. Ken, it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to you and our panelists.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Just do a mic check. I guess it's on, is it? It seems like people can hear me. So first of all, I'd like to say I am General Counsel of Deloitte, and hopefully I will be after this panel because there's a bunch of Deloitte folks here, and they'll be the judge of that, I suppose. But I want to thank my colleagues from Deloitte for being here today. I'm actually here in my capacity as chair of the board of the Ethics Center, and we're very proud to be a sponsor of this event. This issue has a key ethical component to it. We felt it was important for this matter to be heard by a phenomenal panel, which you're going to hear from in a second. We did produce some pamphlets with the limited budget that we have, and they're not on the table, but they are out there, and I would encourage you to take a pamphlet and have a look at it. What we're trying to do is build a membership of the Ethics Center so that we can encourage organizations to talk about ethics in their business. So I'd welcome you to do that. And our executive director is here, and Neil St. John, who's sitting at the table number 2. Anyway, so with that then, attaboy, Neil, attaboy. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this. And when we broached the subject of the Canadian Club, they jumped on it and were very interested in having a discussion. We had some discussions with others, clearly because of the topic of today. There were some organizations that were a little bit shy in terms of being involved in it, but all vitally interested in the topic. So we're onto something here in terms of discussion, but I lucked out in terms of the panel that ultimately was found, and I want to thank all of you for being here today and sharing your thoughts. We had a wonderful prep call, and I'd just like you all to remember what you said on the call, because if you do that, you're going to knock them out of the park. That was amazing. So maybe we'll just forget they're even there, and we'll just have a little conversation like we had on the phone. So I want to start with you, Janice, because All the work you do in this space and the high-profile cases that you can't talk about, but you have the experience from, what's going on? What are you seeing?
It would be wrong to conclude this is a blip. I'm here to tell you it's not. I'm here to tell you that this is a seismic shift in culture and in the institutions in which we work, in which we go to work. I have been sort of a participant to some degree in this. As was mentioned in my bio, I did the high-profile CBC investigation into Mr. G in the fall of 2014. And I think we saw beginnings of rumblings of something under the surface. But you fast forward a few years, and now what we have is really the tectonic plates pulling apart, and there's a fault line, and you can see what's been festering underneath. And what's been festering underneath is systemic discrimination of women as manifest by sexual harassment. Sexual harassment for most women in this country is a working condition. Most women in this country, at some point in their careers, go to work and are sexually harassed. So I think this is a seismic shift. This is a moment, or the beginning of a moment of reckoning. But to think that it's all going to go away and we're going to go back to what used to be would be wrong. And you'd be wrong going back to your institutions with that message. Something very significant is happening here.
The word you used was reactive. That's kind of the stage we're in, reactive. Organizations are reactive to something that's been going on for a while, but is prevalent today.
Yeah, and we see some of this through our office. Our office, the only work we do as a law firm is we investigate workplace harassment and workplace misconduct complaints, and we do some training as well. And the calls that we are getting, the tsunami that's happening in our office is happening all over the place. And help us deal with it. Help us react to the complaints that are being made. And again, I will tell you from the vantage point of our firm, there are complaints being brought forward from complainants we never would have heard from before. They were too vulnerable within the organization. They were young. They were young and racialized, or young and disabled. So that intersectionality that increases people's vulnerability, or their historical things. It happened to me 5 years ago, but as a result of #MeToo, I'm coming forward. There are at least 6 files on my desk that I can say to you have a direct line to Me Too. Somebody has decided to come forward because they were inspired by Me Too, and I just don't think that's going to go away. We can talk a little bit more about kind of proactive things you can do, but right now I think we're all kind of scrambling because we don't have the collective institutional capacity to deal with all of this.
Right. Setting the table is so important for this because it's easy to kind of drive by and get into proactive. I think it's important to understand the context. So you, Lisa, wrote an article in January of 2018. You talked about this issue and used some interesting words in that article in terms of, but you also have experience within your organization, both in terms of leading the global women's network. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that.
About the...
Edelman, what you're doing there and
sure.
your involvement.
So the PR industry is dominated by women. And yet, in the senior-most positions, dominated by men. So in 2011, our global CEO, Richard Edelman, made a commitment that we were going to get to 50-50 gender parity at the most senior levels of the organization, initially by 2016. We didn't reach that target, and now we are hoping to get to it by 2020. But as of last week, we're actually at 47% women in the senior-most positions in our company, including 2 regions run by women, me included, and 40% of our offices globally are actually run by women now.
What happened when that happened?
So I asked Richard Edelman that question, actually. I was in New York last week and did a video that will be airing for International Women's Day on March 8th. And I said to him, what are the benefits of having women in these senior level positions? And he said, we are doing better as a firm by bringing in women who provide a very different perspective. We're making different kinds of decisions for the company by ensuring that there is diversity in thought and perspective based on a more reflective balance between the genders in the company.
And you called it in your article momentum to change, I think, were the words you used. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that? What are you feeling out there in elements, and also in your clients, obviously, because you have a lot of clients that are experiencing.
So I agree with Janice's comments that this is not a blip. This is very real. And my concern when I wrote the op-ed was, and for those of you who haven't seen it, I started to hear from a number of senior male executives in the fall as the Me Too movement was starting to gain momentum, that they who had formerly been champions and advocates for women said, as a result of the current environment, I'm going to step away from providing one-on-one mentorship and sponsorship to female subordinates. And of course, I had a visceral reaction to that, was very angry to hear that, and then took a step back and realized that if men feel this way, given that they currently dominate senior level positions, then this is going to be a further step backwards for women. And so we need to confront it. And as leaders of organizations, it is so critical that we have these conversations between men and women to figure out what is the new normal in the workplace moving forward, so that we can ensure that women are properly represented and have the opportunity to advance in the workplace.
And you talked about a moment not to be lost. I forget exactly your phraseology when we spoke. What did you mean by that?
Moment lost in terms of this moment now.
This moment that we're in.
Yeah, I think that, you know, this kind of behavior has been tolerated in our workplace for generations. And we have a moment in time here where it's gotten, you know, all these cases that have come out, whether it's the financial industry, whether it's the media industry, whether it's Silicon Valley, there are too many to ignore. And so I think that as men, we can no longer just say, well, it's just that person, or everyone kind of knew that that industry was like that. I think that for us, for men, there's an awakening here that we can't just sweep this under the rug. And for all the reasons that, Lisa, you talked about in terms of, you know, the financial benefit of having a more balanced workforce, those are obvious. But I think for men, this is a process, and to lose it now would be a real shame. So I think, you know, there's a need for men to, and I'm encouraged to see as I look out into the crowd, it's about half men, half women. I was at a panel about 6 weeks ago, and it was a similar type of topic. I was in the crowd, and there were 3 men there and 47 women. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's great, but women have been talking amongst themselves, my guess, about this topic for a very long time. And it's now time for men to start to listen to this conversation and participate. And we'll make some stupid comments and we'll stumble our way through it and we'll have to apologize. But I think it's really important for us to start to participate.
That reflection, Janice, is that what you're hearing in the organizations where you go and speak to them about this issue?
Yeah, you know, my experience is a little bit different than Lisa's, and it does cause me to be quite optimistic, actually. You know, our client contacts are predominantly male, not exclusively male, but male. And I have had countless conversations with these clients over the last 6 months or so about, you know, help me better understand this what I'm seeing. Tell me what I should be doing as a leader. I'm thinking about this. What's the most effective language to use? How can I be better at my job? How can I nurture better behavior in my organizations? And shifts in thinking and behavior that I truly I'm in awe of. And so, you know, not to diminish Lisa's point at all, I'm sure there are people who are feeling uncomfortable, but I think equally there are lots and lots of men and women of goodwill who want to seize the moment and make change within their organizations, make them better.
So what do men need to do then? What are your reflections, your learnings on what men need to do better?
Well, it's not just about men. I think the biggest thing that we need to understand, all of us who are interested in this issue, is the extent to which it happens, the occurrence. So 52%, I brought this is my prop, this is fantastic. This is the Angus Reid Institute latest survey, Me Too moment or movement. Shout out to them, they do great work. I told them this morning I was taking it, so there you go. And
I can hold it if you'd like.
Would you? Thank you. Thank you. They did, actually, it's very interesting. They did a survey in 2014, and they're tracking this issue. So it's interesting to see the evolution just in a few years. In any event, they say, according to their data, 6 million women in Canada have been sexually harassed at work, and in the last year, 900,000. It's boggling. It's boggling in terms of that, in terms of the number. How many, what percentage of these women come forward and report? Any guesses? 2%? No, a little higher than that. We're not that bad. A quarter. So 75% of that 900,000 people last year just assumed it, digested it, metabolized it in some kind of way. So I think the biggest thing that we all need to understand is the extent to which this is a pervasive problem, but to the extent it's underground.
Can I just say one thing, though?
Go for
it. Because the thing that is amazing to me, there was a study that came out right before the holidays from the Gandalf Group, and it was a survey of the C-suite in Canada, and 94% of respondents said that sexual harassment was not an issue in their workplace. 95% of those respondents were men. Right, and then you hear the stats around the percentage of people who are sexually harassed. If leaders don't think that there's a problem, that's it.
So true, so true. So you're seeing a change in that, in what you're seeing in the organization.
Well, I think what
leaders are starting to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Me Too does is this constant bombardment of people from all walks of life. It's not sector specific, right? You can't just say, oh, it's just media or it's just politics. It's everywhere. The constant bombardment, the constant news, the constant. I have a Google feed of, sexual harassment, so I'm like absolutely constantly bombarded with this stuff. But I mean, it's constant. Of course, we have the great example of the person who occupies the White House south of the border. I mean, it's a constant reminder of how bad it is and how pervasive this behavior is. And I think it is a bit of an awakening or a moment or a reckoning. You can't ignore it. You can't. It's everywhere.
Janice, if I knew you were going to make that comment about south of the border, I would have worn my dump truck tie. but I didn't think it was appropriate for this, especially since we're on TV. You had an interesting story to tell about somebody who came up to see you after you had spoken on this topic and actually were announced to be on this panel. Maybe you could tell the group about that.
Sure. So when this event was promoted, I received an email from a former employee at Edelman who sent a note to me to say that she wanted to speak with me because while she had been at Edelman, she had been sexually harassed. And she assumed that I knew that this had happened to her. I was running our Toronto office at the time, and I had no idea because I would not tolerate that kind of behavior within an organization that I lead. And so I met with her 2 weeks ago, and she shared her story with me. And unfortunately, at the time, she had spoken to her manager, who happened to be a male, who said that she shouldn't pursue anything, and she went to someone in our HR department who's no longer with us either, and her complaint was ignored. She made the assumption that I was aware of the situation, and so one of the things that is such a key takeaway for me from that conversation was that this is not an HR issue. This is a leadership issue. And so leaders of organizations have to take responsibility in ensuring that they're creating a culture within their organization that if people are subjected to sexual harassment, to sexual misconduct, that the leaders of the organization it needs to be clear that that won't be accepted. And so we had a very productive conversation, but she felt that she could come to talk to me about it because of Me Too, because of what's happening now. And of course, I was absolutely devastated to hear that that had been her experience, but was so grateful that she had the courage to talk to me about it.
Right. So Colin, Lisa had spoken about in her article around her concern for men and their fitting into this. and that we need to be sensitive to that. Margaret Atwood, in an article she wrote in the Globe and Mail, was people had gone after her because she had actually gone after the officials at UBC around an investigation that occurred there and what occurred there. And she came out and said, look, we gotta be careful about swinging this pendulum far too far. You made an interesting comment when we were talking, Colin, about, and this is interesting, probably something for men to talk about, is that it's not okay for men to say, I don't know what to do now. You made an interesting comment about leadership required by men.
Well, I think, this is the comment that Lisa made about men kind of pulling back from mentorship and not wanting to engage out of fear that we'll get something wrong, that we'll be accused of something wrong. I have less sympathy for that position than Lisa I think you are, and I applaud your open-mindedness. I think that men are going to have to learn the nuanced language and communication that women have developed in avoiding situations where that could arise. I mean, every male out there knows that having a mentor meeting with a 22-year-old at 9 o'clock at the bar is a bad idea, right? It's just a bad idea. So there, the kind of the common sense that women have developed in order to put up and manage in this situation, it's time for men now to start to walk in the shoes of other people, namely the female executives that work for them, to be able to appreciate where their power could be putting themselves in uncomfortable positions. And so the idea that men can no longer mentor women, I don't get that. I mean, it would be a terrible tragedy in terms of what we're trying to do with the advancement of women, but I think it's a cop-out. I think as a male leader, you need to develop those skills. It's not hard. Just listen and walk in the shoes of the person that you're mentoring, and do a pretty easy to avoid situations that I think people say that they're worried about.
So I want to ask the two women to reflect on that. Are men teachable, or are we sort of?
I am married to a lovely man who is sitting here with me, and I have two sons. The thing is, we start talking about this and we think, oh my God, it's so hard. It's not so hard. This is not hard workplace behavior. Keep your hands and other body parts to yourself, and be respectful. That's it. I think we can all do it.
Yes.
I'm confident we can all do it.
Yeah. Lisa,
yeah.
You agree?
Couldn't agree more. And
we agree with you too. I just wanted to be sure I was on the same page with you.
So instead of having a drink at 9 o'clock at a bar, go for a coffee during the day.
Yeah.
It's not difficult to figure out how it is that men can mentor women.
The interesting thing about this, men have families too. And we have our responsibilities. So this theory that something has to happen around dinner or after, for a lot of men, we're not comfortable with that either, at least speaking for Colin and me. I had a question. Janice, I had a question for you. You mentioned it, and that was women with disabilities. But there's another community in there too that I think I just want to put on the table, and it's LGBTQ.
Yep.
Both of those groups, you were telling before, you felt it was like 100% for women with disabilities? And LGBTQ, we don't even talk about it, but
right.
those two elements are important in this discussion.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this discussion, but I'm particularly mindful, and these are, my own biases too, that in the discussion we may be losing, women who are more vulnerable, and men who are vulnerable by virtue of various intersectionalities. So disabled women. If you look at trans women, if you're a trans woman, you are guaranteed to be harassed at work. Like it's almost like 100%, according to some data from the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And in fact, one of the worst, I will say categorically the worst harassment case I ever investigated was a trans woman who one of her awful colleagues refused to call her by her name and just called her it.
Oh,
can you imagine going to work and being called it?
Sounds like a professor from Toronto.
No, it was not that.
Okay.
And wondered when it would be committing suicide. I still think about it now. So I think we can't lose sight of that because within the statistics are more statistics in terms of who is really vulnerable.
So there's a good question that came up, and please bring them up because this is a really good one. And I'm interested in the work that you do. I mean, one of the things that 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 we're aware of is that quite often the woman simply wants the behavior to stop.
Yep.
And it's not that they want it to happen to somebody else. I've heard some recent reports of women saying actually they felt an obligation because they didn't want somebody else to experience what they experienced. And I heard that on CBC in the medical space. So there's that tension that organizations face, and then there's the tension of what do you do it? So the question relates to non-disclosure agreements and the place that they play in today's world around the Me Too movement. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, those are tricky, right? I'm torn. The employment lawyer in me knows that to settle a dispute, a piece of litigation, a human rights application, if there's the exchange of money and the other terms, typically there's confidentiality for good reasons. On the other hand, my other ambivalence relating to the extent to which these things go underground is that if we settle each one individually with a confidentiality agreement, it kind of goes underground, and we lose as organizations, I think, the opportunity to connect the dots and understand that there may be places that have deep systemic problems. And what we know, if anybody's interested in this issue, go have a look at Justice Deschamps' report on the Canadian Armed Forces. They are, by the way, the leader in making cultural change in this country, what they're doing with Operation Honor. It's quite extraordinary. But we know that sexual harassment is often not one bad apple and one victim. It sometimes is the whole bushel that becomes toxic. So, I think you're entitled to confidentiality as part of an agreement, but at the same time, these systems, these toxic cultures have to be addressed, so we can't hide behind them.
Yeah. So, one of the things maybe it's my own observation, maybe it's not true, I'm interested to particularly hear from both of you on this, is that whereas before top performing men or senior leaders men who were accused of this behavior, that you try to brush it under the rug, you wouldn't deal with it, or that there'd be repercussions for the woman who's complaining, it seems like those days are gone. Like, it just seems like there are big names taking a hit for the right reasons. Is that what you're seeing out there amongst organizations, or is there still a reluctance by organizations to deal with men who are doing that type of behavior within the organization?
I think that things have changed to some degree, and I'm optimistic about further change, but to say that we're there yet, I think would not be accurate. I think that there is now, I would say, an increased openness to consider the future of your rainmaker, your star, your person within the organization who has the institutional memory, and I think it's making the equation more complicated, but I wouldn't say automatically they're shown the door. I would say that the deliberations about what happens with this person have become much more complex than 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. And I think that is in part a gift of Me Too, because what organizations can see playing out every day in the media is what happens to you reputationally if this thing becomes public, and they also can experience the total lack of control of the handling of the story, right? That's what social media has done, and certainly in the court of public opinion, you're tried and you're found guilty. Like, there's no fairness of process that we offer as part of a workplace investigation. You're done, you're finished. So I think that calculation, or if you like, that calibration is changed a little bit, but I wouldn't say we're quite there where the behavior, if found to have occurred immediately disentitles you to continuation of your job if you're like a high flyer.
So can I ask you a question? It's the flip side of the coin. Are you feeling that men should be concerned around allegations that aren't correct? I've heard that said by men. I'm not going to say I agree with it, but are you seeing that in the organizations you're in, that there's bad behavior where men are challenged inappropriately?
I would say what we are seeing, and we have a particular vantage point, this may not be everybody's vantage point. What we are seeing more is institutions who just lack the internal capability of how to do this thing, like how to respond to this thing. So somebody's, 5 women have come forward with historical allegations of sexual violence, and oh my God, what do? We have no idea how to respond to it. That's what we're seeing more, as opposed to specious allegations without foundation. That's not to say that we find every allegation of sexual harassment or sexual violence to be the case when we investigate them. It's not the case. But that phenomenon, I know there's stuff in the media about it. To some degree, it's, I think, more a comment on what happens when these allegations are displayed in the media, and people are not getting an investigation or a fair process through the media. It's sensationalized, it's salacious, and you're done. Your reputation's finished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I think speaks to sort of the role that journalism and independent journalism needs to play as part of this. You know, I think one of the, obviously I'm biased because I work at an entertainment company that has a local news area, but you've seen what's happened with newspapers and you're seeing what's happening with local television news, and that balanced, fair reporting, if that goes away, these kind of problems get worse. And I think that it's there's a very important role that journalists have to play as part of that process to make sure that we don't find ourselves in these kind of specious allegations. I think that there's an important piece that the journalists need to play as part of this conversation.
So interestingly enough, and this is good news for journalism, we do what's called the Edelman Trust Barometer every year, which looks at trust across 4 institutions: government, business, media, and NGOs. And trust in media this year in Canada is up 10 points. Mm-hmm. So I think there is an acknowledgement, a recognition amongst Canadians that we do need that balanced reporting, as we're seeing a decline in social media. Yeah. But the other interesting thing from our research, just while we're on it, is we asked Canadians what are the trust-building mandates that Canadian businesses can embrace in order to build trust amongst employees, but also Canadians at large. And gender diversity and inclusion is in the top 5. So it's very much an issue that is front and center in terms of importance to Canadians, and a great way for companies to build trust.
Was that a North American survey?
It's actually global.
Global. I'm interested. You're a Canadian in a global company.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you seeing in other parts of the world? Is Canada and the US, I guess, sort of outliers in terms of this movement, or is it happening other places as well?
So I would say predominantly North America and Europe. But then you have to take into account the cultural differences in places like Latin America, where behaviors are very different and accepted much more so than they are, let's say, in Canada or the US. So it really does vary by region. What I would say is that in terms of clients or companies seeking our advice in terms of managing employee engagement around this issue, training, issues management, that's predominantly within North America that we're seeing those kinds of requests.
And is that what you're seeing, Janice, in companies? So looking at that those proactive measures to get ahead of the issue?
Yes, they are looking at some proactive measures, sometimes in kind of a cherry-picked way, like we'd like to do this. This is bystander intervention training. Tell us all about that. That's great, and that is great, by the way. Every workplace should do it, but you also need to have like a policy, and you also need to have like people internal to your organization who know how to like investigate a workplace harassment complaint. So all this stuff works together in one hopes a coherent system that will be
what
effective.
What came to mind was the Trump's idea of teachers with guns to intervene. That's what sort of you're maybe asking for more trouble.
No, that's interesting. Asking for more trouble. So one of the things that we have learned as a firm through our sort of collective experience dealing with these complaints, there was a morning when the penny dropped for me, and I thought, wow, a million harassment victims, only 25% report. And we as employment lawyers, human rights lawyers, have built these great models of policies for all of you clients. If you have a complaint, go down to HR, and here's the pink form and here's the blue form, and fill it in. And that's just daft. Like, okay, that's legally compliant, but why do we think we know something about our organizations when we are waiting for people to tell us through their complaints that we know they never make? Mm-hmm. Like, isn't that nuts? So what we've been saying to clients is if you really want to get your arms around this, how about asking? How about asking your employees if they are experiencing workplace harassment within their organizations? And we have fashioned mechanisms for them to do that. And you know what happens when they ask? You know what they find? Sexual harassment, like to a person. So, but some of what you're saying, Ken, I think, is if we ask, we're going to find stuff we don't want to find. And the fact is, you do want to find it because you want to fix it.
Right, and on that point, so one of the things that I've been doing within Edelman Canada is we have 5 offices, and so far I've done 3 offices, and the 4th one I'm doing tomorrow is having a conversation, hosting town halls in each of our offices to really unpack and to ask the question of whether or not sexual harassment exists within my organization. And yeah, it's uncomfortable to have the conversation because we don't know what's going to surface as a result of them. But if we have a problem, it's our responsibility as leaders to address them and to ensure that employees know that if there is a problem, that they can come forward. And it's not just about policies, but making clear to employees that there are channels and ways for this to be addressed, and that people will be held accountable for ensuring that those complaints and those concerns are dealt with.
And my guess, when those complaints come forward, Lisa, and the person's named and it comes up, very few times you go, oh my goodness, I had no idea it was that person. Like, it's usually known, HR, or there's whispers in the organization about a certain person, and it's very rare, I think, that you find someone that stands accused of this behavior. Everyone goes, oh my goodness, I had no idea. I mean, it's kind of known. And I think as a leader, our responsibility is to listen and to set that tone from the top and to not tolerate that kind of behavior and be very aware of what's going on. Because as you said, Janice, we've got an authorization policy, I've got a workplace safety policy, I've got a harassment policy, you name it. I've got policies, and as a business person managing people, there's only so much time I can spend reading policies, and it's the day-to-day stuff as a leader that I think will make a difference in rooting out this kind of behavior.
Can I point out something quite interesting for those of you who work in Ontario? There is a piece of legislation, I don't know if there are any other employment lawyers in the room, yay. Bill 132, which was an amendment to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and it was part of Kathleen Wynne's initiatives, It's Never Okay. And what that did is actually lowered the standard by which an organization in Ontario must respond with an investigation. The purpose of the investigation is to find out what happened through a fair process, not to be mesmerizing. The standard now is below you've got a complaint. If you are aware as an organization of an incident, so somebody comes into your office and tells you, or you hear secondhand of an incident, you are obliged by statute to investigate that incident. So that's shifting things too, and that's also been bubbling along
really
in Ontario.
Important piece of legislation. It also helps employers.
Yes,
because
it does.
Before you had to wait for that complaint to be filed, it wasn't filed, but you knew it was, and there was not maybe a lot you could do, but now you have to.
Yeah, and I also think it helps employers with that really difficult situation where a person comes forward and says, I'm telling you this, but please don't do anything.
Exactly.
Right? You can't, that is not a request that you can respect. You must do something.
So I've got one great takeaway, and that is ask your people, which is a great takeaway. I'm interested in some other takeaways for the group. So maybe Janice, will start with you.
Well, I do agree with the comments about leadership. I really do think, I'm a bit of a workplace traveler. I get invited to various different workplaces, and they do feel differently, and often they feel exactly the way the leader, kind of behaves. So I do think that this is an issue of leadership, and I think that you want your leaders to model the behavior that you want to see exhibited throughout the organization. And you want to hold people accountable within that organization if they veer off the path. That doesn't always mean that they're going to be fired or fired for cause, but it means that some form of remediation or coaching is appropriate. So as I think about it, it's leadership, and I also think that there is an aspect to this that is divisive along gender, but I do think that this is making our workplaces better is a job for men and women to do together.
Yeah, completely agree. Love it. Colin?
I think for men, it's lean in. Don't don't back away from this topic that half of the workforce are women. And so as a manager, you need to be able to walk in the shoes of both your male and your female and, different ethnic and different cultural backgrounds. And as a manager, this is just another tool in your toolkit to manage people effectively. And so don't be afraid of this topic. Lean in, make a difference. If you make some mistakes, you say something stupid, you could always apologize, but don't back away from this topic because you're alienating half of the people that work for you, which from an engagement point of view, if you want the most out of your employees, you're going to lose them.
Yeah. Lisa.
Leadership is about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable topic for many, but as leaders, it is our responsibility to facilitate a dialogue and a conversation with employees on this very important topic. And I'm actually just going to give a little plug for a Toronto-based organization called 10,000 Coffees. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it facilitates mentorship, connections. And they are, as a result of Me Too, it's been around for a couple of years, but it's a platform that can be integrated into your workplace or whatever internal communications platform that you have, and it will facilitate mentorship, connections. And so, to address the issue around male leaders and their reluctance or reticence to mentor female subordinates, this is a great way for companies to actually facilitate those conversations.
That's great. So inclusive leadership, men leading in, and ask your people. Like 3 takeaways that are pretty easy to do if we think about it in this room. So I just want to thank this panel. They've been phenomenal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Panelists, on behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I would like to thank you for the exemplary way in which you addressed issues surrounding sexual harassment in the workplace. Admittedly, we can be easily distracted by media headlines detailing accusations and revelations. As you pointed out, there's never been a more important time to have meaningful conversations about making our workplaces more safe and harassment-free. Colin, Lisa, and Janice, your perspectives and examples reinforce the importance of open, honest dialogue about this sensitive and difficult topic. We appreciate the positive messages that you left us with. There's plenty of room for helpful and positive dialogue about making our public and private spaces respectful, safe, and harassment-free. And to our moderator, Ken, thank you for adeptly navigating us through this highly sensitive and important topic. Before we conclude, here are some highlights of some upcoming club events. On Wednesday, April 4th, the Honourable Stephen Del Duca, Ontario's Economic Development Minister, will be at our podium. And on Thursday, April 5th, we celebrate Indigenous youth with our panel featuring outstanding Inspire Youth Laureates entitled Leadership in Action, Stories that Inspire a Nation. So to order your tickets, to learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation via Twitter and Instagram by following us at CDNClubTO or by using that hashtag. I would like to extend another round of thanks to today's event sponsor, the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Corporate Policy. And we'd also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. Once again, to learn more about the club, please visit us at canadianclub.org. Thank you all very much.